Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to announce today that more than 100 of my colleagues have joined me in writing to President Obama to thank him for his action to use prosecutorial discretion to stop deportations for DREAM Act eligible immigrants. We are pledging our continued and strong support for this policy. My colleagues and I, 104 of us, are standing together to make clear that we think America is a better place with the immigrants who will be helped by this new policy. Of course, not everyone agrees. Progress doesn't always mean consensus. My colleague, Mr. King of Iowa, wants to sue the president, take him to court, because Mr. King is determined to deport every last young person who is DREAM Act eligible. Mitt Romney says that he would veto the DREAM Act and does not support steps to protect these very young people. Let's remind ourselves exactly who the Republican candidate for president believes should be deported. DREAM Act eligible young people who have lived in America for more than 5 years. Most of them were brought to our nation as children, many of them as infants, toddlers, yes, babies. They've stayed away from crime. They attended our high schools and colleges. They are no different from your children or my children. They regularly excel at school. Some are valedictorians. They are athletes and musicians and leaders. Many of them want to serve our nation in the military. They are leaders in their high school ROTC. They are in every sense of the word, except for the very narrow, exclusive sense promoted by Mr. King and Mr. Romney, outstanding young Americans. Apparently, when Mr. King and Mr. Romney look at the winner of your high school science fair or a young immigrant eager to become a soldier, they see a threat to our national security. Sensible Americans see their friends and neighbors, young people who want to make America better. They want these young people to be treated fairly, and they also want our nation to be safe. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask Mr. King and Mr. Romney a question. In a world where our law enforcement officials have limited time and resources, who should they be focused on investigating, detaining, putting behind bars, rounding up, and deporting? The captain of your high school chess team or a drug smuggler? I know the answer. I think most of Americans would agree. Immigrants who break the law should face serious consequences. Immigrants who are busy studying for exams should simply be left alone. That's not just my opinion or just the opinion of immigrants or advocates or 104 of my colleagues. Despite those few who would like to sue the president and force him to kick high school kids out of this country, President Obama is actually legally and responsibly using prosecutorial discretion to leave young people alone and focus instead on actual criminals. It's the consensus legal opinion among experts. Even the Supreme Court has weighed in. In their Arizona decision last month, the Supreme Court wrote, quote, "A principal feature of the removal system is the broad discretion exercised by immigration officials. Federal officials, as an initial matter, must decide whether it makes sense to pursue removal at all." Whether it makes sense to pursue removal at all. Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court's opinion is not enough, then I submit the opinion from members of Congress, including members I don't often agree with when it comes to immigration. These include Lamar Smith, the chairman of our Judiciary Committee, David Dreyer, chairman of the Rules Committee, and even Brian Bilbray, chairman of the House Anti-Immigration Caucus. Just a few years ago, as this letter notes, they weighed in forcefully on prosecutorial discretion. In a letter to a previous president's administration, the staunch opponents of immigration reform enthusiastically defended prosecutorial discretion, writing, quote, "The principle of prosecutorial discretion is well established." They wrote, "Legal experts at Immigration Service, quote, apparently well-grounded in case law, should show that Immigration Service has prosecutorial discretion in the initiation, the beginning, and determination of deportations." It's simple, really. And the members of Congress who signed this letter with me today, the Supreme Court, President Obama, and yes, even Lamar Smith and dozens of his colleagues just a few years ago, get it. It's time to leave hardworking immigrants alone. When we do, our law enforcement officials can focus on catching the actual bad guys. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that this letter signed by 104 members of Congress to President Obama thanking him for granting deferred action to dream-eligible immigrant youth be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
Without objection.
And his time has expired.